Hi, everyone. Welcome to Author Tidbits. I am here today with my friend Sarah McConkie, and she is quite a wonderful author. You're historical only, aren't you,
Yes.
so far? Okay,
Yep.
so which is probably why we're besties, is because, historical authors, we all like to get together and geek out together about history. So
That's right.
that's why it's always awesome. So today she is going to talk to us a little bit about using real life people as secondary characters in books, which I find super interesting. I know a lot of us do to some extent, but I think you do probably more so than a lot of us do. Because I mean, I'm sure as pretty much any Regency author has, mentioned Prinny or maybe even Lord Byron.
Sure.
But I'm not sure that they usually play a significant role. Whereas I think yours play more of a significant role. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today and kind of how you go about it and maybe some of the things you've learned or along the way. If you have, I don't know, maybe you haven't. Maybe
No.
it has all been smooth sailing and there has been no lessons learned,
No,
which would be cool.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't happen very often. So to start off with, talk to me about this. So from what I've seen, which I haven't read all of your books, but I've read, I think, a couple of them. They seem to be maybe more primary secondary characters or more main secondary characters, as opposed to, like I said, a lot of those that tend to be, what is the word, tertiary characters that are way in the back.
Yeah.
So how do you go about I guess maybe my first question is, why do you do that?
Yeah. So I think I obviously I like romance. That's probably, I would guess, most of your readers and my readers, right? Love romance, and that's what they are doing. But for me, I think there's a lot of exciting people in history that haven't been highlighted, that people don't know about. And so like I read a lot of we can call them Regency. I also write a lot of Victorian, that time period, which is a little bit later.
Yeah.
So in either of those places, or even Georgian, whatever, like this 100 years that we like to read about, right? I have read tons of stuff that have talked about like social change or political change or whatever. And that's really interesting to me, like how a chimney sweep got their rights, or the last one I read was about the lace works and the lace makers. And people talk about things like that in history. And we like that because we're history people. But
Right.
I think even deeper than that are the actual people who started those movements, or who were a part of those movements, or had a big role that we don't always highlight. And we can't always highlight them because they're real people, they're documented, and they actually like have their own love story, right? And so I can't just like rip off their love story. I'm not doing that. But I think it is fun to use them as a side character that comes in, so that by the end of the book you say to yourself, oh, I didn't know about that person in the Victorian era that did so much, or that person in the Georgian era or the Regency era that was able to change history. And so I look at these people as history changers, and I think that they should be highlighted because they've done a lot for us.
Which is cool. So a lot of yours, though, aren't necessarily super well known. Like
Right.
they're not your, prime ministers, or
Sure.
like I said, your Lord Byrons or your, Prince Regents. They're more of these people that are maybe history makers, but maybe a little bit quieter.
Yeah.
Because they're not necessarily the ones that everybody knows about.
Right.
That
Yeah. I can tell you about them if you want, if you want to hear a little bit about one of them.
I do. Pick your favorite.
So I have two favorites. I'll start with Joseph Paxton, and this is a spoiler because this book is coming out in January with Covenant. So it hasn't even, we haven't done
So next January.
Yes, next January. Wow. So
okay.
It's almost, it has a cover and it has a title, but I'm not going to divulge that at this moment. But I'll just tell you about this guy because he's a side character. And he, actually, sorry, this guy is in my current whip. which will be the second in this series. So this one isn't coming out in January. That's a different one. But
we kind of forget, don't we?
I know people who, maybe if you're not an author, you're like, how could they get their characters confused? But all the time I'm writing my next story and it's the name of the previous person that it keeps jumping in. If it was Charlotte and now I'm on Anne, I keep writing Charlotte instead of Anne. Anyway, okay, so this guy, his name is Joseph Paxton. And if you have been to where Mr. Darcy was, if you've been to Chatsworth House, which is the Mr. Darcy, like what she modeled it after, he was the gardener there and he created a bunch of stuff there. He created greenhouses there. And so he started as a gardener. He was a really lowly guy and he worked his way up and he became really popular and famous with the people who own Chatsworth House, a duke. And so he became really well liked. And then this is in 1851, more like probably 1850 when they were getting it going. They were going to do the Great Exhibition, which is with Prince Albert. And they were trying to decide how to make this big, huge structure on Hyde Park. And they wanted it removable and they wanted people to come visit it. And they were going to do a worldwide exhibition. And anyway, different people put in bids for their plans. And Joseph Paxton kind of drew up a plan and submitted it. And he ends up getting knighted. They choose his plan. It's a big, huge structure that looks like a gigantic greenhouse. It has tons of light that comes in. They're able to keep the existing trees that that were on Hyde Park, so they didn't have to ruin all of the trees that had grown, for hundreds or decades of years. And so this guy started as a gardener, becomes super well known, and he is like the father of the modern greenhouse. He also was a big architectural guy, and it's just cool that he was able to rise from something so lowly to being knighted and recognized by all these nobles that we like to read about. So I have a book that talks a lot about this 1851 greenhouse, and he's in it, and he is a side character that comes in, but you learn a little bit about him, and it's been fun for me to learn about him. And I got to go to Chatsworth last year, and you walk on all around their grounds, and we went up to this greenhouse, and it was one of his original ones, and they had these black and white cutouts, and it said Joseph Paxton and Sarah Paxton, who's his wife. And I just got the chills and got so moved by this, because here's his actual work. Here's where it all started. And I feel like, he's got a story that no one's going to hear, no one's going to ever know about. He was just a gardener that had an architectural design, but he made this great building. He had the idea for it. And that exhibition really changed England, and it changed international trade. And there's tons of fallout that come from the Great Exhibition and people learning, and the money that was raised there. That's how we get a bunch of museums in England. They were all funded by this through Prince Albert. So anyway, it's like one little guy's contribution made a huge change, right?
Right. So did you know about him before you went to Chatsworth?
I did.
Okay.
Because
how did you learn about him?
So
what made you, where did you, it's probably a rabbit hole like we all go down, but what were you doing that you all of a sudden were like, oh my heck, this guy has to be in a book?
Yeah, I needed a greenhouse in my book, or I needed a place for two characters to come frequently and meet up. And so in my story, there's a greenhouse that exists across a property line. And so they both come into this greenhouse often. And so because of that, then you research greenhouses, then you learn Joseph Paxton created a greenhouse, and then you learn about the Great Exhibition, because I wanted some kind of historical context for it. And then you learn that the greenhouse and the Great Exhibition are pretty much the same architecture. You learn about him, and then I don't know, it just kind of comes together. Sometimes you're looking for little bits of truth to add into your fictional story, right? And then it kind of snowballs and melds, I would say.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
I don't think people who don't write probably understand how I was researching a contemporary novel, and I found something that I was like, oh my heck, and it ended up in my Regency, which the actual story took place during the just before the French Revolution. So it even went further back, but it was time-wise I could
Yeah.
turn it into. And I was like, how often does that happen that you're researching for a contemporary, but yet you end up with this idea that's like clear far out there? That's really cool. So how
I
big of a
wish
role
that
does he play in the book?
I wish Oh, it's not huge, but he does, like, help in the ending, and
Yeah.
he gets mentioned in the middle, and she meets him in the middle, and then in the end, he kinda helps to save the people because he just happens to be at the Great Exhibition admiring
Uh-huh.
it, and so there's, like I hope that these people that I'm actually using, give me grace that I'm incorporating them, but I feel like I'm helping the world know about them. So,
Yes.
they're dead, but they probably don't mind. Um, anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Um, Becky Connolly and I were talking about historical fiction.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that always, like, I think probably holds me back from writing historical fiction is that, oh, what are their relatives or people who,
Yes.
you know, knew, have some more connection. Are they going to feel about what I've written about them? So
Right.
it's always
Yeah.
one of those. But I try and be nice about people. So hopefully,
Yeah, I mean, these guys are good guys in my books.
yeah.
They're highlighted well. And to your other question, or back to your other point, I would say, like, if readers could only see how many tabs we have open at a time and how many weird things I Google, like
Yeah.
how long does it take for blood to coagulate after falling off a horse or something,
Yep.
like these kinds of things, they might think we're crazy. Like my Google
Oh,
search
yeah.
and my tabs, like, there's 15, 20 open at any given time. But so you
Tabs make my husband crazy. I will come in and I'll be like, "My computer is running so slow." And he'll come in and he'll be like, "It's because you have 25 tabs open." And then he'll be like, "And you have 2 browsers open with 25. Why can't
Yes.
you just shut them?" I'm like, "'Cause I need that right then."
Yes, every single
They
one has
get
something
it.
really important that I'm researching, so
Exactly. And he's like, "Just put it in your collections." And I'm like, "Well, it is already in my collections, but I don't want to have to go over and like click on it and pull it."
right.
I mean, who's got time for that? It's just
No,
easier if it
just
stays
need them
open.
open, ready to go.
Ready
So,
to go.
yeah,
I'm glad I'm not the only one. That makes me
yes,
feel much better.
right.
um, let's see. I had a question and then I just lost it. So, how many? What other kinds of historical people have you written about?
Let me tell you about one more. I probably should have led with him, but I have a book that came out a few years ago. It's called The Promise of Miss Spencer. And he's like just barely mentioned in it because the book takes place after I can't remember now if he died. I think he dies like the year before it takes place. But basically, he's the one that we get modern vaccination from.
Oh, uh-huh.
And so he is the doctor that did a lot of exploratory things. Now it would be like totally against like what you can do as a doctor and what's okay in
Hmm.
researching. But he gave smallpox to this little boy named James Phipps when he was 8 years old. And he basically gave him part of the pus from what was called cowpox and like put it into his body, and then he gave the kid smallpox. Because when Jenner was a little kid, what would happen is if you were exposed to smallpox and you got it, or they wanted to expose you so you could get over it, they'd like give it to you or touch you with it, the exposed like pus, whatever, stick
Hmm.
you in a barn and like hope in a week you still lived and like come give you a little bit of food. And that was like, to try to help you live, to get exposed to it,
Right.
to to jump the gun on it. Well, this kid, he gave cowpox to, which is a similar sickness, and then
Yeah.
he gave smallpox to, and because of the cowpox, he built the immunity, and he never died. And he was exposed to it like 20 other times in his life. So this James Phipps character, who was basically like the
The guinea
patient,
pig.
the guinea pig of Edward Jenner, is in my story. And so he kind of explains it to the main character, like, you know what, this happened and this happened and this happened, and we need to be helping people. And they were able, because of this procedure, to help like tons and tons of people. They would line up at Edward Jenner's place. It was called the Temple of Vaccinia, and I've been there too. It's like a hut on his property, and they'd come in and he'd inoculate them with this cowpox instead of smallpox, and then give it to the next person and give it to the next person and give it to the next person. And they just would do that. And it saved people's lives. And it's how we started getting vaccines. It's why vaccine comes from the Latin root for cow, because vaca, anyway.
Yeah.
That
So
what
really,
yeah.
the phrase should be, no James Phipps were harmed in the making of this, right?
Yes.
That's basically what he was the precursor to testing on animals even.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like he should have the warning label on the back. And
yeah.
I mean, it's crazy that he did that now, but because of that, I mean, I think even like the one of the royalty sent their kids or did the same procedure to help their kids because nobody wanted to die from smallpox. And and today it's like one of the few things that's been eradicated from the whole earth, right? So I think it's pretty cool that it started with this guy who did it to this James Phipps guy. And I'm like, did we ever celebrate him? We should, because everybody's
was James Phipps like an orphan, or I mean, how
he was a gardener for, it's always the gardener. He was the gardener, or like the gardener's son, I think is what it is. He was the gardener's son for Edward Jenner, who was like a gentleman farmer. So he was a little bit higher up, and it was this farmer's son. But to Jenner's credit, he gave him like an entire estate or an entire house by the time he died. Side note, you can go to Edward Jenner's house and you can go into this tiny museum. It costs like $6 to enter. So, it's not that fancy, but I've been there too. And it's all of his stuff. So when I went to England, I was like, I know this is random, but I have to go to Berkeley and I have to walk inside this guy's house because
that's so funny.
It was part of the book,
Yeah. So. That is really funny. I do think it's interesting, the things we do research.
Yeah.
Like they are weird. Yeah. And some of them are so hard to find.
Totally.
And I think it's so interesting, you're talking about him. I mean, this was medical. And to see some of the ideas they had back then, because, I look and I'm like, the 1800s, that doesn't seem like that long ago, really. Right. I mean, comparatively speaking.
Right. Until you read about what they did for their medical practices.
I know.
Hey, that's the dark ages. Like,
and then, and you're like, what the heck?
Let's let them lose all their blood. That's such a good idea. We should just let them lose all their blood, and that will make them feel better.
I was reading something just the other day on, it was something like super mild. Oh, it was a sprained ankle.
There you go.
It was like, how would you treat a sprained ankle? And they still would bloodlet them. I'm like, for a sprained ankle, why? I don't understand the like logic behind that. It's like everything that happened, from a stuffy nose to a sprained ankle to, cholera.
Totally.
Let's just bloodlet them or leech them. I'm like, oh my goodness, that is crazy. Yeah. But I've also been researching color blindness, which is also super interesting to see the things that they believed about color blindness back then that were totally false. Totally false. But
that's interesting to me because I have family members that are colorblind.
Yeah.
So
I have a character in a book
I didn't know they'd even
that's colorblind. You didn't what? What was that?
Oh, I just didn't realize that they would recognize it back then. That they would. I guess there would still be confusion about it.
Yeah, they did. And there was a doctor who thought he knew why it was, what was causing it. It was something he believed in the eyeball that, now, like, obviously I can't remember. That's why I bookmark things. But he thought it was this certain thing in your eyeballs that made it that you didn't have it. And so I mean, like he would go to extremes like shooting red dye into eyeballs to try and put it in there, which obviously it didn't work because that's not really what causes it. But so it was around and it was interesting, but which I find also interesting, like alopecia was around then, and they actually had the name of alopecia for it back then.
Oh wow.
Which I didn't even realize. I would have thought that was more new agey.
And that's a tricky thing too, because some of the sicknesses you have to find the time period appropriate name for it, and some are the same, right?
Yeah.
That's today.
Yeah, like malaria. Malaria was not known as malaria. It was is it ague or
Yeah. Okay.
ague, or I don't know. I've heard a lot of different ways to say it, but
Mm,
or the um, sweating sickness, or So then
mhm,
you're like, oh, which one is this?
totally.
So okay, so the person you are writing about now, or the book you're writing now, what historical person do you make sure every one of your book has one of these historical characters?
So I did that with The Promise of Miss Spencer. The one I just told you about is hopefully going to be in a series called Victorian Visionaries. So every person in, like, there will always be a side story in
Mm-hmm.
every um in every story that comes out. There'll be some Victorian male or female that was really revolutionary to the time period. So yeah, like another one that I have, and this is the one that's coming out in January. This has Lord Ashley in it, and he kind of has a long name, Ashley Cooper. So he's like the Earl of Shaftesbury, but then his name changes because like his parent dies, right? And his title changes. But
Right.
this guy was in Parliament and he helped he helped with tons of stuff. He helped with mining. That's where it is affected in my story. It's about miners, and he helped change the regulations in Parliament about that. And he actually like crawled down into a mine shaft and saw the conditions there. And so in my story, they're continuing to change the mining laws because they changed in 1842, but then they also changed in 1850. And so my story takes place in 1850, and he references back to that. And my character is like advocating for the miners, to have better working conditions, like less women, less kids, those kinds of things that are basic to us. And so he goes and he meets with Lord Ashley, and Lord Ashley like supports him and kind of gives him a leg up in that. So
Is it difficult, because a lot of these are lesser known? Is it hard to find information on them?
kind of, you just kind of have to dig until you hit gold. I feel like I just research until I find something that is inspiring to me. Like right now I'm writing a book about people coming across on a boat from Britain to America, immigrating. And I really wanted a real life story where one of the passengers and one of the crew members got married. And I just like looked through accounts and I thought, oh, this would be so cool if I could find something that was this accurate.
Yeah.
And the website I was using had a lot of, it's like a ship register. And it said afterwards, like first mate and so get married 3 days after they land. And I was like, there's my story, found it,
Yeah.
So you kind of just have to look until Google something and look at, you're on Wikipedia, and then you go to the next link, then you go to the next link, until you find that name of the person that you want to use. And then you see how they can work into your story or whatever. So
That's cool. So do you end up doing author's notes at the end that kind of
yeah, like
discuss a lot about it?
author's note is like my favorite thing that you can do. And the favorite thing for me to read. I try not to read them till I finish the book because I want to know like what's real and what's not. And I kind of get annoyed sometimes if I read the whole book and they're like, yeah, I made this and this and this up. I'm like, none of that was real. Come on. Like
I will look people up as I'm reading and be like,
will
is
you?
that a real person?
Yeah. So the book that's coming out in January has a hippopotamus in it. And the hippopotamus was the first hippopotamus in the London Zoo. So like to the point of the hippopotamus, he's an actual person. So like they go to see this hippopotamus that was given from an English guy from an Egyptian guy to the English. So, like I have that in my notes. Like, yes, there was a London Zoo, and yes, this was the hippo, and yes, these were the 3 other animals, which are now extinct, but they did look at them. So I think it's fun to have like those kind of details in the background,
Yeah, which is super funny. I was because during the Regency, I've read several that have an elephant in the Tower of
Mhm.
London, which there
Yeah.
wasn't an
Okay.
elephant in the Tower of London during the Regency. There was an elephant, at least from
That's
all that I've read.
Yeah.
I've researched it quite a bit. And during that time, there wasn't. There was one, however, in like the 16 or 1700s.
Okay.
But it's so cold there. That's part of the reason.
Yeah.
Is it's too cold for elephants in England, and they would feed it wine and alcohol because they thought it would keep it warmer.
That's weird. Okay.
So the elephant was basically always drunk, which I'm pretty sure probably isn't good for it.
Yes.
Needless to say, the elephant didn't last long, but
Yeah.
it's those types of things that are so fascinating to me.
Yeah, I know.
So
I'm yeah.
I have not, I will say I have not used people as much as you have. I did in one of my books. It was this one that I was telling you about that I learned about. Um, and actually, she was dead by the time my book was written. And
Yeah.
so, but I find what's so interesting is, I mean, I knew, so this person that her name was, um, now I can't even remember, it's Jean. She was French. Anyway, she was like the first major con artist out of France. She
Yeah.
stole like this huge necklace that Louis the 15th had made for his mistress.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard about this, the diamond necklace scandal,
Uh-uh.
where she stole it. And she actually stole it in a way that then all of the French people thought it was Marie Antoinette.
That's
Kind
funny.
of aided in Marie Antoinette going to the guillotine, actually,
Wow. Okay.
because of this person. Um, and so I found, I knew she had a sister, but there
Yeah.
was not a lot of information on the sister. So the sister is kind of what I ended up using most of, because I could make stuff up and it was
So,
harder to find. But the author's notes, oh my goodness, they had to get like so lengthy to put
yes.
what was made up, what wasn't made up, and
Totally.
all of that. But it was kind of fun.
Yeah.
And I guess in some ways it makes our life both easier and harder, right? Because we
Yeah.
have to adhere to it, but then we've also already got a storyline written for us.
Right.
We don't have to come up with it.
Totally. And I like both sides of that coin. Like I was talking, my brother-in-law was teasing me. He said, I don't know why you are so into this historical time period. Like, I don't know why you like it. And he loves to play chess. And I said, why do you like chess? There's so many rules in chess that you have to follow. And I said, that's
Yeah.
exactly why I like what I like, because it's like a puzzle to me. I have to fit
Mhm.
everything that's real and all the rules and the constructs into something that's not real. And so that's fun. You
Yeah.
know?
Well, and then it can even be fun to break the rules. I
Yes,
know
totally.
this is a rule, so
Right.
then we're going to kind of turn it on its head and see what
Yeah.
happens.
And that's tricky too, because you have to do it within a construct that is believable and like
Right.
allowed and recognized, so
Yeah.
there's that too.
Oh, why we do what we do, right?
Right.
So, do you have any other? So you write? Have you written Georgian? Did you say?
No, I actually haven't written Georgian. I've only done Regency and Victorian, early Victorian.
Do you have any other time periods you're looking at?
I have one random like diner girl sci-fi that is
Oh,
written, but that's like on the back burner. And then, I've looked into like Middle Ages, but these are just dabblings in
yeah,
manuscripts that have not really finished all the way. So for right now, I'm sticking in this zone.
yeah.
Yep.
That's good. It's kind
But
of hard sometimes to branch out, isn't it? It's
yeah,
a little scary to branch out because you
yes.
know what you know,
And I
and then
feel like I need different writing skills for that. And so it will take me longer to write those because I
yeah.
need to do a different style.
It's interesting. This is totally not even on the subject, but like I have a Middle East or a Middle Ages story, so a medieval story series that I'm
Oh, cool.
dabbling with. Like I've
Uh-huh.
had the covers for it for like 3 years.
Yeah.
I should have written it already, but there's this intimidation because I'm
Right.
like, I know the Regency era.
Right.
And
Oh,
so, and even with the Regency era, I still am like double checking. Like
totally.
I
And
have,
every rule that you looked up, you forgot. At least for
right,
that's
right.
I'm
And I have OED open all the time on my computer, the
yeah.
Oxford English Dictionary to check word usage and all the
Yes.
time. And so
Yeah.
there's a little intimidation. But at the same time, I also am like, but I don't have to use OED
Mhm.
because actually they don't even have any words really in OED for the 1100s, which is
Right.
when it would
So
be.
you
So, and if
yeah.
I were to write like the 1100s, no one would read the book at all.
Right.
So
Right.
it's an interesting juxtaposition. Is that even the right word? I don't know. Because
Totally.
it's one of those that it's like I probably have less rules to follow,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
still it's like intimidating to me
Right.
because there
Because you
are still some rules and I'm not sure I know what they are.
Yeah.
So now I just have to read a lot in that genre.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone else you want to tell us about?
Nope. I think that's it for today, but it's been lovely to chat. And
It
it's been
has.
fun to tell somebody about the people that I love,
I think it's so interesting. And I think when you read, like when I read your books now, there's going to be like a different almost level of reading. You know what I mean? Because it will be, oh my heck, I know that guy.
Yeah, totally.
Which is
Awesome.
really cool. So thank you for that. Wow, and we're almost right on 30 minutes. So if I hurry and end now, I won't be at 31, which would be like a rarity for me. So thank you so much, Sarah, for coming on with me. I really appreciate it. I hope everyone will come and join us on the next episode. Make sure you subscribe so that you'll know when that comes up on YouTube, and we'll see you all later. Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks. See ya.